There is no greater manipulator of American politics than Israel. Here he is staging a rally with members of Congress as props. Useful idiots, yes.
Yeah.
They have disgraced this country.
And he was given 58 standing ovations. It's truly remarkable. It's disgraceful. I'm embarrassed to be an American.
A visit that will never be forgotten.
It's amazing you got 58 standing ovations. Let me make a couple points on this, Danny. First of all, the war in Gaza is the most thoroughly documented genocide in recorded history. There is just so much information, and I mean reliable information out there about what has happened in Gaza. And much of the information is provided by Israeli sources. And you want to remember that the International Court of Justice, looking at the information that was just available by late December of 2023, not looking at the information that's available since then, concluded that there was sufficient information available to make a plausible case that Israel was committing genocide in Gaza. Now think about that. There is sufficient evidence to think that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. And what happened yesterday is that the leader of Israel, the person who is responsible for executing this genocide, was invited to speak before the US Congress. And he was given 58 standing ovations. It's truly remarkable. It's disgraceful. I'm embarrassed to be an American when I see something like this happen. Furthermore, this is my second set of points. If you look at what Netanyahu was saying, a number of arguments that he laid out were simply blatant lies. He said, for example, that Israel is not purposely targeting the civilian population in Gaza. There's an abundance of evidence that shows that this is not the case.
Yeah.
Listeners should go to the magazine. You can get it online. It's an Israeli magazine, Plus 972. That's Plus 972. And there are two articles in there by an Israeli, Yuval Abraham, who talked to people who were deeply involved in the bombing process in Gaza. And it's unequivocally clear from reading those two articles that Israel was purposely targeting the civilian population. This is a punishment campaign against the civilian population. Then he said, if you look at the fact that many people in Gaza are starving, you have to understand that this is not because of anything the Israelis are doing. It's because Hamas is stealing the food that Israel is generously allowing to come into Gaza. This is nonsense. No serious person believes this. And I could go on and on. You know, he raised this whole specter of Hamas burning babies or killing babies in attics. There is thorough documentation on how many Israelis were killed, what kinds of Israelis were killed in terms of age and gender and so forth and so on. And there's evidence of only one baby being killed, and that baby was killed by Hamas in a crossfire. This is a tragedy for sure, and I don't want to make light of it. But thankfully, we don't have evidence of 2 or 3 or 4 babies being killed, and there's no evidence of babies being beheaded or burned and so forth and so on. But over time, and yesterday when he appeared before Congress, Netanyahu made these outrageous arguments that are simply lies.
Yeah.
And in this whole anti-Semitism charge, is there a lot of anti-Semitism in the United States? Well, if you define criticism of Israel as anti-Semitism, then there is a lot of anti-Semitism in the United States. But that's a ridiculous definition of anti-Semitism. If you're talking about anti-Semitism in the sense of hatred of Jews and wanting to do terrible things to Jews because you think they're bad people, that's real anti-Semitism. And there is certainly some of that in the United States, regrettably, but there is not much of that. And that's not what's going on college campuses. What's going on college campuses is that people are protesting what the Israelis are doing in Gaza. They are protesting a genocide. And then you have Netanyahu go before Congress yesterday and get thunderous applause as he says that these protesters are, number one, anti-Semites, and two, they're being funded by the Iranians. There's no evidence they're being funded by the Iranians. This is another lie.
Yeah.
This is where we are in America. And, when you put together the public discourse that's led by our leaders on Gaza and on Ukraine, what you see is massive deception campaigns. And it's very hard, in my humble opinion, to have a functioning society when people are not acting, for the most part, as truth tellers. And I just don't have the sense that there are many truth tellers in charge in the United States today, whether we're in the executive branch or in the legislative branch. When you look at the performance of those congressmen and senators who were applauding him yesterday, you can't help but be thoroughly depressed.
Well, the Holocaust, which was the ultimate expression of anti-Semitism, was a horror, and anti-Semitism is despicable. And for a long time, this experience gave Israel, which was established in the wake of the Holocaust, a free pass. It was not subject to international law. It was not subject to normal rules of morality. It could do whatever it wanted, and we would back it. All of us as young people, myself included, admired Israel. We all read Leon Uris' Exodus. We believed this was a humane expression of Judaism, which is a humane religion, and that it was a safe haven for the world's Jews. But as it has turned out, it has become a gross perversion of Judaism in many ways. Zionism is the negation of Judaism. Many Jews consider it idolatry, that is, the worship of a state rather than the worship of God. But more particularly, as Israel has persisted in its effort to ethnically cleanse Palestine, to eliminate the Palestinians, to deny their existence, to deny them the right of self-determination that Israeli Jews have demanded, correctly, the Israeli sense of morality, the restraints on Israeli behavior have progressively evaporated. And what we see now in Israel doing is absolutely disgusting to any decent human being. And most of the world, with the exception of a few countries like our own, have broken with Israel, see Israel as an outlaw. And in fact, the International Court of Justice, the World Court, just ruled that it was an outlaw in every sense.
Yeah.
That its very existence in the West Bank and Gaza is utterly illegal. There is a tentative charge of genocide against it. Mr. Netanyahu flew directly to the United States because he didn't dare stop anywhere where he might have been arrested and as a war criminal. Well, he's utterly shameless. He's a blatant liar. His whole approach to the truth is Orwellian. And you just saw it. And this is why Israel no longer has any credibility. And the applause that you heard is why the United States has very little, if any, credibility around the world. How can you applaud blatant lies like that with a straight face?
What is the truth on the food amount?
The truth is that the trucks aren't getting in at all. The truth is that the United States farcically attempted to bypass Israeli obstructionism with a pier floating off the beach in Gaza, and that didn't work. And It actually ended up delivering the equivalent of 1 day of the normal deliveries over the whole course of its existence. And we have now abandoned it. Nothing is getting into Gaza. The hospitals have been destroyed. There's no medical care. Israel has now discovered that there's polio in Gaza, but it's blocking the vaccine. This man is a mass murderer at a level of evil we have not seen since Adolf Hitler in the 1930s.
That's shocking to even say out loud, much less to be true.
The phrase from the river to the sea actually is in his party, Likud, charter. And it means exactly what he just said, that there is no room for anyone other than Israelis in this space, in his view. Now, the interesting thing is, of course, Jews always lived in the Holy Land. They were there under the Ottomans. They were there prior to the colonial project of Zionism, which was explicitly colonialist and which remains colonialist in the sense that it is mistreating, evicting, setting aside, and murdering the indigenous inhabitants of Palestine. The slogan of the Zionists was a people without land for a land without people. But Palestine had people. It still does. So this is utterly racist, utterly despicable, and it has no credibility outside the true believers in Zionism. So it's a shame that he would make this kind of argument, and it's an even greater shame that he would get applause for it. Now, let me conclude. My children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren have the Lenni Lenape blood. The Lenni Lenapes were the tribe that foolishly gave Manhattan to the Dutch. They had lived there for thousands of years. I think it's time that we give it back to the Lenni Lenapes. I mean, let's be reasonable.
Only fair.
This is just a kind of arrogance, hubris, racist supremacy, which is just unacceptable in the 21st century. He has no evidence at all of Iranian involvement or funding of protests that I think are admirable expressions of the younger generation of Americans' moral indignation at genocide. They are not pro-Hamas. They are anti-genocide. And I think there's a terrible irony in an Israeli murderer, war criminal, coming to the United States, blatantly interfering in American internal affairs and politics, and charging Iran with doing so, on the basis of no evidence. There is no greater manipulator of American politics than Israel. We talk about Russiagate, the Russians or the Chinese or somebody trying to manipulate our electoral process. The most egregious perpetrator of such manipulation is Israel and its unregistered lobby in AIPAC and other Zionist Organization of America and others who take direction from the Ministry of Strategic Affairs in Israel and implement it. This is exposing the level of manipulation of American politics directly. And useful idiots is an interesting phrase.
Right.
I think it applies to those people
Right.
in the Congress who facilitated this show, which is designed mainly to keep Mr. Netanyahu in office, despite the fact that he's surrounded by fascists and a majority of Israelis want him out. Here he is staging a rally with members of Congress as props. Useful idiots, yes.
Yeah.
They have disgraced this country. I cannot recall a moment when I felt, and by the way, I'm not speaking as a diplomat, I'm speaking as an American and somebody who feels strongly about the importance of this country and is distressed at the extent to which it is now dysfunctional. And I cannot remember a more dysfunctional display than what you just put on.
Again, yeah, I just can't help but cringe as I watch that clip right there, because it just brings to mind what you just said about Congress being used as props. I mean, he literally said, "Hey, yeah, don't clap yet. Hang on, do this," and then everybody went okay until he got to his applause line, and then he just cut it loose, literally like it's their props in a play.
Well, he's of course twisting reality entirely. The paranoid are very good at making enemies. The Zionists are very good at producing anti-Semitism. That's what they're producing. It is not the charge that Israel is conducting genocide, which is well-founded, which has been examined legally, internationally, and found to be plausible. It is not that is delegitimizing Israel. It is the conduct of genocide. It is the fact that the victims of genocide, the greatest horror of the 20th century, are now perpetrating it themselves. This is simply unacceptable. And his statements are absolutely, I mean, George Orwell would have cringed to hear this level of distortion coming from somebody with a distinguished diplomatic and political career. I think, I'm very sorry for Israelis. This man has led Israel to the abyss. There are many decent people in Israel. A lot of them have left recently because they're concerned about what is happening in Israel and what is happening under this man's leadership. And they object to what Israeli soldiers have been doing in Gaza and what settlers have been doing in the occupied West Bank. There are many decent people in Israel. They have been betrayed by this man. They have been betrayed by him and his colleagues. And he is risking the very existence of the state of Israel, which he claims to be defending. Well, it is guidance to the international community. And indeed, at the end of the opinion, the court declares that it is the responsibility of all the members of the United Nations to act in accordance with the finding that Israel is an outlaw, that it has been stealing land, murdering people, conducting an apartheid regime, and that it is essentially beyond the pale, if you will. So what is happening, the significance of this court decision is that it will inspire the boycott, divest, and sanction movement, the BDS movement, and it will lead to a break in relations with Israel on the practical level as well as at the formal level by more and more countries. Some have already done that, of course, in response to the horrors of the genocide in Gaza. But now the international community has spoken and declared Israel to be a pariah, an outlaw. And you know what happens to outlaws? People organize posses against them if there's no law enforcement. So I think, this is an invitation to the General Assembly of the UN, which asked the court to examine the issues and render its opinion, to take action. And it has within the UN Charter the ability to do so. The UN Charter provides that no country that is a party to a dispute may vote on that dispute. Well, the United States has been blocking everything in the Security Council with a veto. But strictly reading the UN Charter, we are a party to this. We have made ourselves a party to it. And we could be deprived of that veto power under the UN Charter.
That would also be
I don't think that will happen. But I mention it because it is legally possible. And it is, I think you can expect a great deal of international action to isolate, ostracize Israel. And Mr. Netanyahu's speech, far from combating that, was directed mainly at hardline voters in Israel and at the stooges that the U.S. members of Congress have become. I note that 80 of them did not attend.
Yeah.
And that's to their credit. But those who did attend and applauded should be ashamed. The world is seeing a great deal more of the genocide than we are because our media is self-censor. But anyway, I think the basic point here is, Danny, and you've nailed it, is there's no longer a viable legal argument for Israel to make about its settlement activity, its apartheid, its discrimination against the Palestinians, its warmongering behavior against its neighbors. No legal argument at all. Israel has gotten by for 74 years or more with argument, 76 years, sorry, with arguments based on spurious interpretations of international law. Those are not tenable anymore. So I think this does change the atmosphere, and it enables those who see Israel as problematic and as almost suicidal in its behavior with the ability to challenge that behavior.
And let me ask you, in just the last few minutes we have here, I don't want to get too far away from the genocide claim here. There's a report out in the Israeli press. It's talking about that even if the war ended tomorrow, the deaths that Gazans will face will continue years into the future because of the things that have been done in terms of the lack of care that they've got. According to this right here, 26 out of 36 hospitals in the entire Gaza Strips are not even functional. People have not been able to get treatment for ailments and sicknesses, cancers, et cetera, and that will have an impact longer. Just tell us a little bit about the human toll that this whole issue, that everything that Netanyahu was talking about is covering up.
Well, I note that at the beginning, after October 7, the Israelis made quite an effort to discredit the so-called Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza. Of course it was Hamas-controlled. That was the government in Gaza. Now they've stopped that. Why? Because other studies of the death toll in Gaza have put it at close to 200,000, not 40,000.
Oh, my.
And so suddenly the Hamas-controlled Ministry of Health in Gaza is providing a lower figure, and we need to accept that. So we don't question it anymore. But the fact is, the Lancet said 186,000 Palestinians are probably dead under the rubble. An enormous number of Palestinian dead are buried in that rubble. No one knows how many, but that is probably a pretty good estimate. And of course, let us remember that the purpose of this war, although Netanyahu says it should be prosecuted until Hamas is destroyed, is to destroy the Palestinian people in Gaza, to annihilate them, to depopulate it. And we have people running around the United States now selling beachfront property in Gaza to American Jews who might want to move to Israel. Who the hell assigned Gaza to Israel? Under what pretext is it that Palestinians there have no voice in their future? And here I would note that, oddly enough, at this very moment, that Netanyahu is discrediting the United States by appearing in the Congress. Beijing, the Chinese, have just convened 14 Palestinian factions and patched up the relationship between Fatah, which runs the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, and Hamas. And the Palestinians will insist on a voice, the decisive voice, in their own future. They will not accept something imposed by us, still less something imposed by us.
Yeah, and I think that these ICJ rulings will probably help galvanize that around the world, whether we want to or not.
Exactly.
I agree with you. That was one of a lot of it I didn't like about Netanyahu even being in the building, given what he has clearly been doing and the lies he's been telling nonstop since this whole thing started. But was that all of our people kept giving him all these thunderous applause and standing ovations when so much of what he said was self-evidently untrue. And yet they were literally acting as tools of Benjamin Netanyahu.
2 quick points, Danny, very important. It's important to understand that roughly half of the Democratic senators in Congress were not present. They boycotted the talk. And roughly half of the House members who are Democrats were not there. So to their credit, lots of Democrats, roughly half of the Democrats on Capitol Hill were not present. And that's very important. And second, one cannot emphasize enough your point that many Jews, right, are in the forefront of protesting against Netanyahu. Many Jews are deeply involved in what's happening on campuses. And you cannot call these protests anti-Semitic when so many Jews are involved. It just makes no sense at all. But again, we do so much in this country rhetorically that makes no sense that it is, in the end, I'm sad to say, hardly surprising.
Right. Yeah. And that's what I can't get around there. But, you know, if nothing else, we're just going to keep doing shows like this where at least we put out what is true on the ground and what is actually happening, no matter what anybody likes it or not. And that's one of the reasons we so value having you come on our show, because you call it like it is, whether it steps on somebody's toes or not. And we appreciate that and value it a lot. So thank you for that.
My pleasure to be here, Danny.